El Paso is a mountain desert city. Have you been there? Anybody been to El Paso? Yeah. It grabs your heart in all the right places and doesn't let go. The city turns golden when the sun rises in the morning, full of hope for a new day. Juarez, Mexico looks like El Paso's twin city, but it is separated by a heavily patrolled American border filled with crime and poverty. It's the biggest border community in the world, with a combined population of 3 million people. We can learn much by visiting the border and seeing it as a microcosm of today's globalized economy, according to the Border Awareness Experience from Annunciation House. While El Paso has its fill of poverty, it's a safe city, one of the safest in the United States. Quite a paradox, isn't it? Mm-hmm. If immigrants can get past the walls, fences, and border police, and if they don't die in the desert heat, they have a chance to make America their home. Although we know that the United States is not really the safe haven we like or want it to be for immigrants. The good news is that there are fewer people crossing and dying in the desert at this time. I took a social justice immersion trip this spring that was planned and led by 2 religious educators, Ann Principe, a member of our church, and Jen McAdoo, a Unitarian Universalist from Maine. As part of the immersion experience, we went to a well-funded elementary school and spent the day with the most delightful children in one of the poorest districts in the United States. We planted vegetables and fruits in a garden behind a community cafe called Mustard Seed, where rich and poor and everyone in between gathers in community to enjoy a meal together. If you can't pay, you can come back another day and help in the kitchen. We provided dinner for families in a place called Annunciation House, where new immigrants are given shelter, food, and sanctuary. We visited a place where homeless women are given a chance to make a better life for themselves, learning skills necessary to find a job and obtain good health care. They are given the opportunity to get off drugs and alcohol if there is that need. We toured the city. I climbed a mountain and ate Mexican food that you can only dream of eating here in the East Coast. Food is luscious. The one experience I had that went straight to my heart was a vigil coordinated by Voice for the Voiceless for Mexican journalists who have been killed in Mexico for telling the truth about the crime and the corruption in their country. There were 4 journalists on a panel sitting outside at a table in front of Annunciation House telling powerful stories. As the city turned dark, all the names and many of the pictures of the murdered journalists were projected on the outside of Annunciation House. 150 journalists have been murdered since 2003. Once the candles were lit and the background music turned on, we started seeing the pictures and names of these brave journalists. Names of the fallen were being called out. This immersion in El Paso became very real for me. We were on the border of Juarez and El Paso, witnessing the heart, soul, and beauty of these journalists who were tortured and killed for writing and telling the truth about corruption and murder. The journalists reported the truth of what they saw to try to make their communities places of safety, of caring, of economic opportunities, of people getting enough to eat, and places where families could grow together in love. And to think that our government will not give many of them asylum is heartbreaking indeed. Yes, we learned that grim fact at the vigil. I started to feel engaged in the life of the El Paso community because I heard their stories. This transformative experience I was starting to feel not only happened at the vigil, it happened walking down the city streets where people of a different culture than my own shopped to buy their food and clothing and other domestic items. I felt like a stranger in a strange land, but privileged at the same time to have this experience. Ann Principe has strong ties to the Unitarian Universalist Church in El Paso, and she led the worship service on the Sunday of our trip. Ann invited the participants of our social justice immersion group to participate. The service was about pilgrimage. I wore my sea bean around my neck and used it in my homily as a symbol for finding meaning, the gift of life within, and the potential we have for serving. El Paso is far from the ocean, so the sea bean isn't necessarily an apt symbol for pilgrimage in this mountain desert area. I ended my homily by telling the congregation that the sea bean represented my pilgrimage to the Bahamas and that I was going to find an equivalent symbol that represented my immersion trip to El Paso. A symbol that would hold great meaning for me. Well, I didn't find this symbol until a few hours before we left for the airport. We were all privileged to participate in a deeply spiritual Mexican purification ceremony at the home of an amazing healer. Her daughter, a young artist who helped us cook a meal for the residents of Annunciation House, invited us to come and meet her mother. I think her mother's name is Magdalena. Is that true, Anne? And to look at her jewelry and artwork she had for sale in her family home. After the healing ritual that left us all in an altered state of mind, we had time to look and buy jewelry and artwork. And there it was. A bracelet made of orange beads and a sea bean. I was told that Mexican jewelry oftentimes has a sea bean incorporated in the design. I found my El Paso sea bean and felt that invisible thread of existence that weaves itself through creation, connecting us all like Indra's net. In this well-known Hindu story, the Vedic god Indra has a net strewn across his castle and out into the universe, where every cross thread of the net contains a gem that reflects all the other gems in the universe. We are each a reflection of one another in this interdependent web of life, and we shouldn't waste an opportunity to be in community, especially with others who are different than us. Let's continue to find the place within us that gives life the shape of justice, as written so beautifully in one of our hymns called Spirit of Life. It was sung this morning. We might just find our sea bean of potentiality on pilgrimage in some distant place or as close as where we hang our hat.
For those of us who struggle with what faith means, it might be helpful to think about faith as a verb. Some people in religious communities these days like to use the word faithing, but I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to use that word without cringing. It's a little lingo-y, right? Faithing. But I think we are always encountering faith. That's the verb, encountering, running into it. The way that you run into a friend on a street corner, or maybe the way you run into an ex at a party, that encounter isn't always going to be welcome or comfortable. The reason for that is that an encounter with faith is always about waking up and making us aware of a dimension to life that just a moment before was inaccessible to us. Maybe we weren't ready to see it. Maybe we were in denial. Maybe this was just the right time for this teaching, this learning. This is a learning that a lot of us avoid because it's hard. It can be very painful. And so we behave like the husband in this little story told by Anthony DeMello. This is the little story. After 30 years of watching television, a husband said to his wife, "Let's do something really exciting tonight." And she said she was thinking about visions of going out on the town, dancing or something. And she said, "Well, great, what should we do?" And he said, "Let's exchange chairs." The desire for spiritual growth that has gathered each one of you here this morning, that desire for a life lived more deeply, moves us out of those easy chairs of our minds, those lazy boys. I always loved the Zen Buddhist stories about the teacher hitting the student on the head with a stick, bop. Wake up, bop. Not a violent strike meant to hurt or harm, but a sharp knock from reality. Be present to the present moment. And then what? Something that's probably going to be a little bit of a stretch. When I say the word faith, you might think about belief, things that people believe. That's what faith means, right? But it isn't quite that. A fact is something that we know to be true. Okay, this is made of wood. This is hair growing out of my head. Faith is about something we hold to be true, but we can't prove it on a scientific basis moment to moment. St. Paul famously wrote, "Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." Here are some things that we might hold as articles of faith. Everyone in this room cares about many of the same things that I do. Here's another one. Music has the power to lift our spirits. Love is an extraordinarily powerful force. These are not things you can prove empirically or would even want to. But whether or not we consider ourselves to be religious people, we have to understand that we all live and act out of multiple faith claims. And not all of them are benevolent. Despite what Paul wrote about faith being the substance of things hoped for, these aren't things that we always do hope for, our secret, unknown faith claims. Here's one that I've heard somebody make. No one likes me. Or here's another one that I heard recently from a young man when I was offering a petition to be signed on behalf of a minimum wage hike. He said, "The government is so corrupt, there's no use in my participation in democracy." That was a faith claim for him. We make just as many faith claims out of our woundedness as we do out of our hopefulness. And I want you to remember that because it's really important. Part of what we try to do together in community is to examine the kind of faith that we're constantly in the process of developing. What kind of faith are we creating for ourselves, for our children? Is it a faith based in trust or suspicion? Is it based on a sense of possibility or in resignation? Faithing, I said it, is a day-to-day project of our lives. The faith that we are daily creating is the one that we will need to rely on when we hit our hardest challenges. That's the faith that will be our intimate companion when we come to the end of our lives and prepare for that ultimate transition into the mystery. Before Karen went to El Paso, she and I talked a lot about how anyone can justify traveling a long distance to encounter a truth that we could very likely just go down the street to experience. We had both recently read a book called Toxic Charity by Robert Lupton, which raises ethical questions about well-meaning church folks going on expensive mission trips or social justice immersion trips that can do much more to make them feel good about themselves than they actually help the communities they are ostensibly going to help. It's a really good book. I recommend it to all of you. Karen brought it to my attention. Being aware of those ethical concerns, Karen went to El Paso to learn from people who are doing justice work at the border well and in relationship with their communities of concern, so that she could bring back that consciousness, that knowledge, and that experience and apply it to her work here as our Director of Faith Development. Along the way, as will almost always happen when we go anywhere with open minds, ears, and eyes, Karen had faith encounters as well as educational opportunities. Her beliefs knocked up against new knowledge and lived experience, and she came away with new beliefs and convictions. That is, she came away changed and charged. That's what a faith encounter does. It has an energy to it that charges us to do something with what we've confronted, with what has encountered us. And this is different from having a spiritual experience. A spiritual experience is a wonderful thing, but it's private. It's an interior moment of time that reveals a transcendent dimension in life. But again, it's a private arrival of spiritual energy that stays within you as a kind of a ministry to your soul. Like for me, on a spring rainy day, listening to Chopin always creates a spiritual experience, a spiritual encounter with my soul. But a faith encounter often comes first as an interior private arrival of spiritual energy and then becomes that bop on the head from the Zen master that comes as a wake up. Be attentive to this moment, even in discomfort. It has somewhere to take you. I think about James Reeb, a young Unitarian Universalist minister from Boston and father of 4, who heard Martin Luther King's call to Selma, to come to Selma, please come, join us here, in March of 1965, and was beaten by white supremacists while on his trip and died of his injuries, 38 years old. Viola Liuzzo, a Unitarian Universalist laywoman from Michigan, also had that faith encounter. She went to Selma in 1965. She was shot by Klansmen and died. For Viola Liuzzo and James Reeb, their faith in the power of people to change the world and their encounter with a force that encouraged and encouraged them to put their own lives on the line for that faith claim proved to be fatal. Hopefully this will not be the case for any of us, but we can never say for sure. Faith encounters. It does not leave alone what it encounters, but makes demands that are sometimes quiet, confronting a dysfunction and painful behaviors in a family system, small, never known to anyone, and sometimes dramatic, going to Selma. I do not think that we need to get on a plane to have meaningful faith encounters, although those journeys can be valuable. We can encounter faith in our own kitchens, our own neighborhoods, our workplaces, the local bakery, wherever you are, when the Spirit moves you to connect, to companion, to make time and room for deep attentiveness. Some traditions teach that a faith encounter is one where you, the faithful person, goes out and shares what you believe with others with the intention of making those other people believe what you believe. But that's not what our faith tradition teaches us. That's not what we do. We go out into the world humbly and open, acknowledging that it's difficult, if not impossible and irresponsible, to be certain of much of anything, given the rapid way, the way that human knowledge changes so rapidly and evolves. But in the meantime, we hold our beliefs lightly. We remain open to wisdom. We understand that an active faith and encountering faith will change us all the time. I want to close with a word from a courageous and faithful woman who changed and evolved so much over her own lifetime, who passed away this week, the poet Maya Angelou, who reminds us, we delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty.